Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our next episode of Pro Musicis Family of Artists. I am so happy to welcome Robert Dick, the 1983 winner of the Pro Musicis International Award in flute. Robert has gone on to really make a strong presence in the flute world, not only in traditional flute repertoire, but he has been venturing into improvisation, into jazz, into computer music, also exploring different tones and different performance practices of the traditional flute. And he has developed an international reputation, having written many books and a renowned pedagogue, really elevating the flute almost to a completely different level. And we're going to talk about some of that fascinating history that Robert has given the flute through his career. So welcome, Robert, to Pro Musicis Family of Artists.
Well, thank you so much. And I have to say, the Pro Musicis family is one that it gives me a tremendous joy to be part of. And it's been quite a while, and I still feel very, very much part of the family.
Absolutely. It is a family. Can you tell us, okay, basically, let's start early, some of your basic training. You started, playing in orchestras, kind of in traditional repertoire, and then kind of broke out of that, and then went to the Pro Musicis Prize in 1983. Can you talk a little bit about that time and that transition that led up to your audition of winning the Pro Musicis International Award?
Okay. Well, so basically we're looking at a period from 1958, when I started playing the flute, to 1983. So when I first started as a kid, it was strictly a course of study for a classical flute player, which was aimed squarely at an orchestral career. There just wasn't much in the way of a solo career. And there was one figure at the time who was enormously influential, of course, Jean-Pierre Rampal. But American flute playing was all about orchestra playing. And growing up in New York, that's what was there. So when I was 15, if you had said, "Hey, Robert, what are you going to do when you grow up?" I would have told you with absolute certainty that one day I would be the principal flutist in the New York Philharmonic. And I was doing everything you could possibly do to reach that goal. I went to the High School of Music and Art, and we had 4 orchestras and 5 bands, rehearsed every day. And if you clawed your way to the top of the flute pyramid there, you actually really did have to be able to play. And I played in the All-City High School Orchestra as well. And they were community orchestras. And even when I was in high school, in the early 60s, there were still some professional opportunities for very young players. I made $5 playing first flute in a sort of minor league performance of Aida once, but it was like, $1964.
So basically, you were developing your chops more or less during that time. Maybe your
yes,
basic chops.
Yes, and I hope some nascent musicality was growing.
Well, of course, but did you know? But my question to you is this: did you know that you were going to move on? That you weren't completely satisfied with this traditional repertoire when you were a teenager, although you didn't know the direction your life was going to take? Did you feel that something was missing that you needed to explore during that time as well?
Well, I felt that very, very early on as a young boy. And then because, when I first started to play the flute, every week you learn a couple of new notes. And the new note moment was my favorite moment of the lesson. And gradually you climb and get to the top of the flute. And one day my teacher and I came to the new note moment, and he went right on. I said, "Well, don't we have any new notes?" he said, no, you know all the notes. Um, and I said, well, don't we do two notes now? Um, my mother was a teacher of beginning pianists, and I heard them start with one note at a time, and then there were two notes and chords. My older brother played the cello, and he was sawing away at one note, and soon he was sawing away at a couple. I thought all the instruments did that, and my teacher broke the news. The flute played only one note at a time. I was furious.
Oh my!
I mean, what a ripoff! I mean,
No double stops or anything.
No, and I thought, well, I mean, what did we do to deserve this? And it's a question I asked myself a lot as a child. But and I remember thinking then and there, that's going to change. And now, as in my teenage years, early teens, that all kind of went into the background as I was busy working away. But, the primary difference in classical music for the repertoire of an instrument like the flute as compared to the repertoire of an instrument like the violin or the piano is that when you're playing the piano, at every step of the way, since day one, you can encounter great music. And the better you get, the better you get. And there's more great music to encounter there. On an instrument like the flute, that is not necessarily the case. And at a certain place, you rise to a level of ability on the instrument where there is very little great music. I mean, you can count the pieces on the fingers of your hands, and there is enormous amounts of extremely, acrobatic junk, and the acrobatic junk just didn't speak to me.
Didn't appeal to you.
I mean, it's embarrassing, and so in high school, I had two experiences that were really important for reawakening this seed. One was that one of the woodwind teachers at the High School of Music and Art showed me an article that had been published in Perspectives of New Music, which is a journal for composers. And John Heiss had found like 10 double stops for the flute. And I duly played them, not terribly well, and I copied them all out. I still have that piece of music paper in a box somewhere. And the other was I showed up at a flute lesson, and my teacher, Henry Zlotnick, who was, a very classical musician, his career encompassed playing in silent movie theaters, the Sousa Band, and playing piccolo in the NBC Symphony with Toscanini.
Wow.
And he said, yesterday I was listening to WNYC, and in the 60s, WNYC had loads of live music on it. I played on WNYC several times in high school. This is Young America Plays, and
wow. Amazing.
And which was arranged through the high school.
Sure.
But anyway, he said, I was listening to WNYC, and I heard the strangest flutist I've ever heard in my life. He said, I'm not trying to pretend that I have any understanding of what he was doing at all, but I had the strongest feeling that there's something really real there. And I wrote his name down for you. And it was Severino Gazzoloni, really the pioneer of contemporary flute playing. And the next day, on the way home from school, I stopped at the Lincoln Center Library, and lo and behold, they had an LP by Gazzoloni. It was the very first recording of the seminal piece sequenza by Luciano Berio, and he was playing some other pieces from the Milan group of composers in that period. And I couldn't make heads out or tails of it either, but it was really fascinating. And I listened to it a lot, and I know it went in there and something happened with it. In college, the seeds started to sprout, and I did not go to a conservatory. I went to Yale, which actually was a tremendously helpful decision to prepare for success in music. You know, when you make the announcement that you want to be a musician, this can be like one of the darkest days in your family's history. And it was for mine. I put it off as long as I possibly could. But eventually, to this day, an undigested dinner, my father cornered me and made me cough up the furball of truth that what I really wanted to do with my life was play the flute. And that what I wanted to do was go to Juilliard because I thought that's what you should do. Woo! That went really badly. As far as a conservatory was concerned, and my parents' support of it, it was a no-fly zone. It was not going to happen. And so one of my flute teachers, the one who my parents had not actually had much contact with, because I knew him from Tanglewood, I called him to ask for advice because I thought, this is an adult who knows what he's talking about and who I can trust. Everybody else my parents have already talked to, and it was like a spy novel. They've been compromised. And so James Papatsakis of the Boston Symphony explained to me that going to a real college would be an opportunity to develop myself as a person. He said, everybody's going to practice the flute. Everybody's going to know the repertoire, and everybody who's still there is going to be able to play and play well. The difference is going to be what you have to say, which is a real consequence, a direct consequence of who you are. He said, and you have an opportunity to go somewhere and really develop yourself as a person. And that spoke to me. Because he wasn't talking about having something to fall back on. The Pro Musicis family is filled with people with fire in their eyes. Absolutely. And when they were teenagers, that fire was burning really bright.
Going for broke.
Yeah. And, if you talk to any of us about falling, we'd say, well, if I fall,
get back up.
Fall on my face, not on my butt. And if I fall, I will get right back up keep on going.
It's really the secret of life, isn't it? Of success.
It is. And
picking yourself up, dusting yourself off, and starting all over again.
Yes, exactly. And
I think that's a Fred Astaire lyric, but anyway, go ahead. Irving Berlin. But anyway. It's true,
imagine even Fred Astaire must have taken a few falls when he was learning.
Of course. So you were discovering yourself at Yale. You were finding a voice.
Yes.
The difference between going to Yale and going to a Juilliard, as the gentleman told you at the Boston Symphony, was that you could not only develop your musicianship, but also you could develop your individual personality.
Yes, and so, at Yale, I took an electronic music course, and that changed my life. And also, the rock guitarists had a very deep effect on me because of the enormous range of their sonorities. The difference between Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix was light years greater than the difference between Julius Baker and Jean-Pierre Rampal.
Interesting, yes.
And so, and I wanted the flute to have that kind of range. Every record by Jimi Hendrix had you know, 100 or 200 sounds that had never been played before. And I thought, okay, that's the kind of model for me for whatever the music I'm going to play will turn out to be. And I began to just find new sounds.
Please demonstrate something for us.
So, for example, here's the traditional flute sound. Now, no two notes. Well, how about
Now, were you improvising there, or just?
Yeah, I was just plucking
just
a
showing
few out
us
of the catalog.
Just showing us the different colors that you can get out of the flute that you were exploring.
Well, that's a very small selection.
Well, I know,
but it's but just the idea that.
But it would seem to me that a traditional flute player would have to put on a totally different pair of sunglasses to play in this realm.
One of the things that really struck me was that the entry point was at the virtuoso level. There were no steps in the ladder to the barrio sequenza. You had to catapult yourself up there yourself, and most players who attempted it did a pretty poor job. And I decided that one of my missions was going to put the rungs in the ladder. And so, I've made an enormous pedagogical commitment over my life. And, I've written collections of etudes. I've written the basic daily studies book that you need. It's called Tone Development Through Extended Techniques. And while our best-selling authors wouldn't be too impressed, a flute method book that sold 15,000 copies isn't too bad. So a lot of players who are not interested in contemporary music use it because it works. It makes their tone better if you do those exercises. When I showed Jean-Pierre Rampal the manuscript of the first half of my book, he said, "This is going to change the face of flute playing." Really, the deepest artists understood that, I had made a commitment to go someplace that was musically different, but musically valid. And, we're happy to lend a hand.
So you're exploring all of these new avenues, developing these ideas, this commitment to pedagogy, Yale, this whole background. Now, how in heaven's earth, somebody as versatile and trailblazing as Robert Dick and the flute during that time find his way to the Pro Musicis International Award?
Well, Robert Dick found the Pro Musicis International Award by looking for it. I was in New York in my early 30s, and financially speaking, scratching the earth with a pointed stick. I mean, it was really, really tough. And I once had been given some very good advice by a guy who was winning a lot of those competitions, who explained how you win them. He said, there are two rules and you must follow them. I said, okay, what's rule number one? Technical perfection, absolutely nothing that anybody could objectively point to. No mistakes, no broken notes, no out of tune, anything. I said, well, okay, I could do that. What's rule number two? never interpret the music strongly in any direction because one of the judges won't like it. And I said, well, thanks. This is extremely informative. And you have saved me a lot of time, a lot of energy, considerable expense, and a great deal of heartbreak and pain because I'm not going to follow rule number 2. So I don't have to pay all those entry fees anymore. And he said, no, think about it a little further. I said, okay, what? He goes, you win the competition. And then when you play the recital, you can do anything you want. And I said, well, yeah, but that involves turning yourself off for a lot of the time. Now, if you can turn yourself off and then turn yourself back on, well, more power to you. Except for one group. There was this group of Pro Musicis competition winners, and they weren't duplicated on any of these other lists, and many of them were doing really interesting things. And I thought to myself, I could belong in this group. And so then when I found out how Pro Musicis proceeded, it was very reassuring. I rented a small concert hall and put on this concert, basically for the tape. Sent it in and bit my nails and eventually learned that I'd been invited to the live round. And they treated us like human beings. This was different. I'm not going to try to camouflage myself and present myself as another classical flute player. I mean, if this is all about the truth of the matter, I'm going to tell the truth here and now. And I played my piece that straddles both worlds. It's a transcription I made of the Paganini Caprice, Opus 1, number 15. But I transcribed it with all the chords played multiphonically. And, the melody begins. Oops.
Can you play a little bit for us? Yeah.
Yeah, with the flute playing an octave. The violin was playing an octave. So.
Wow. And at this point, could you talk a little bit about your relationship with Father Merlet and your thoughts on him?
Well, yes, because, I did get to know Father Merlet. And the first thing I learned was that he was not a guy who stood on ceremony. It was very clear that what made him go was his faith and his incredibly deep love of music and truly the desire to share. I mean, it was exactly
Absolutely.
What he said it was. It was completely honest. And, and you could laugh with Father Merlet. He had a great sense of humor.
How he had this vision of taking our music and taking his winners and presenting us in community service concerts where people would never get a chance to hear music. And,
yes.
And every artist that you talk to, everybody has their special memory of doing that, of every Pro Musicis winner. And it stands out as being something very special in every one of the winners' lives. And I'm sure the same is for you.
Yes. I have many very powerful memories of the community service concerts. And in fact, long after my time getting the big public concerts was over, I continued to do public service
Oh,
concerts.
nice, beautiful. Now,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question. Before we go start talking about performances that have inspired you in your own performances, can you quickly explain to us? You have a patent. You invented something for the flute. It's called the glissando head joint, and it's for sale on your website, by the way.
It is.
And will you please just briefly explain to us what it is?
Okay. This is a glissando head joint. And what it is the actual, the mouthpiece of the flute is called the head joint, a term that's caused no end of problems at various customs interactions. But, and the real mouthpiece is, whoops, I'm seeing myself in mirror image here, is inside. There are two tubes. And so this telescopes. Now, this is new in flute history. Usually there's like a precursor in some culture somewhere at some point, but this is new. And so,
So it's basically from what I got from that is that the possibilities are endless. Basically, they're infinite. What you can do, you can do microtones, you can do chromatics, you can do glissandi, you can do all kinds of different types of sound within those contexts, and so it opens up all new worlds to flute performance, and I guess that is your purpose of inventing the glissando head joint. Please share with us a recording that inspired you, that you loved to listen to, that we can listen to now, that had an influence on you, and introduce that for us if you can.
Yes. Well, when I was a kid, Ron Paul was my guy, and he still is, to my mind, the greatest interpreter of the classical flute repertoire ever. And his recording, made in the 1950s, of the Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach D minor concerto, I believe it was with the Stuttgart Chamber Ensemble, conducted by none other than Pierre Boulez. And this came out on a Vox LP. I still have my scratched and dented copy in a box somewhere, catified too from the years of cats.
will you share with us a performance of yours that you especially means something to you or you like, and introduce that for us?
Sure. Well, certainly in the context of my Pro Musicis family membership, I have a video of a much more recent performance of the Paganini Caprice in E minor, Opus number 1, number 15. And it's called Posato, which means dignified and sedate. And I've always been kind of puzzled by this because, the dignity is clear, but if you can find what's sedate about it, maybe you want to tell me. It's sedate in the way perhaps that Mount Vesuvius was the day before.
Robert, thank you so much for sharing your story and your talent. I mean, you're a real trailblazer and innovator, and have done so much for the flute, always sticking with honesty and integrity in your values and in your music making and your exploration of new ways of tackling the flute and performing in the flute and coming up with these new performance practices. You've done a great service to music and to the flute community and to the public to hear these wonderful new colors and this literature that would not have existed. And not only that, you've talked about how you developed this, as a pedagogue, these volumes of etudes to get performers to go from point A to point B to point C, to play works that are a little bit more difficult, but not just jump into the most difficult works, which is so
Yes.
extremely important.
Actually, many of the music I've written, without those intermediate steps, quote unquote normal flute player could not even begin to approach. They are vastly more challenging because it's a much more vast conception of what the instrument can be.
Right.
But what I hope I'll be remembered for is my music. And all these contributions of flute technique are so important to me.
But they're the means to the end.
Yes, exactly. And you know what? If you ask me, well, what did you learn from Father Merlet? Which I think is a very germane question. What I learned from Father Merlet is that the exploration of the human soul is endless. And reflecting that in music is what I am constantly trying to do. And, you know, now at age 71, I've reached a certain point, but I'm in many ways feeling like I'm just getting started.
What a great mission you've been on, and as you say, and you emphasize this through so much, which attracted you to Pro Musicis in the first place. It was always struggling, you know, with this concept. You always wanted to be honest with yourself in the way that you made your music and approached your music, which kept you out of a lot of other competitions. But Pro Musicis was different, and that's what brought you to it. And
yes,
and so you are a real trailblazer, and the flute world and the music world owe you a great debt of gratitude for what you've done in performance practices and in your own compositions, not being afraid to push the envelope. I salute you for that. Father Merlet is proud of you for that, and always pushing the envelope at the highest artistic level. So with that, thank you, dear Robert Dick, for sharing your passion, your talent,
thank you
with us.
Thank you
for
so
Pro
much.
Musicis family of artists. You are an inspiration, and it's been a pleasure visiting with you. And as I say to all our artists, I like to think that Father Merlet is upstairs in heaven, smiling down upon you as he is all his winners.